Welcome to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare, recovery coach professional. Do you love food, alcohol, drugs, sex, social media, cigarettes, or gambling a little too much? The traditional narrative says that addiction to these vices is the problem. The truth is, they are just symptoms. This hit show takes you from recovery to your ultimate life as my special guests and I help you discover how underneath every vice is the addiction to the suffering that developed due to unhealed trauma. So what can you do? Hungry for Answers provides groundbreaking, proven solutions from my best-selling spiritual book, Feast and Famine, Healing Addiction with Grace. It's time to stop suffering and start living your ultimate life. You have a divine right to a life filled with love, joy, peace, and abundance. Hungry for Answers starts now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare. So today I had a special guest coming on, but unfortunately she had a death in her family. And so I decided to spend some time with my best-selling recovery book, Feast and Famine, Healing Addiction with Grace. And there's some wonderful channeled messages within the book. And I thought I would share those with you. And so I want to talk to you first about how did I know to write this book? So I was in a meditation and I was in a beautiful waterfall. There was water like streaming on my head and my face, and I was standing underneath it. But when I opened my eyes, I saw this being of light walking towards me. And I knew that it was a woman, but I wasn't sure who it was because when I looked closer, her face kept changing. She became every woman, every age, every ethnicity, and it just kept shifting and shifting. And I thought, that is extraordinary. And then I realized that I should say something. So I said, hello. And the being of light said, hello, I am Sophia. And I said, oh my goodness, I know who Sophia is. Sophia is the feminine aspects of God. In Christianity, she's known as the Holy Spirit. And in Judaism, she's known as the Shekhinah. And what she likes to be referred to is grace. She is grace. And anytime grace is needed in our life and it arrives, it is a blessing from Sophia. So I said, Sophia, how may I help you? And she said, I need you to write a book, Robin, called Feast and Famine, Healing Addiction with Grace. And I wanted you to talk about, from our perspective in the spiritual world, what is the true problem and how can we resolve it? And I said, fine. And she said, but wait a minute. I said, yes, Sophia. She said, I need you to talk about your addiction and recovery, Robin, in the book. And there was just one problem, and that was that I was not in recovery. I was in active addiction from obsessive compulsive food disorder and bulimia. So I said to myself, okay, I'm going to write it anyway. So I wrote the book. And at the end of the book, I wrote, geez, I'm sorry that I hope the teachings work for you. They didn't work for me. And so have a nice life. And then I realized I can't publish this book until I'm in recovery. And then after a while, I came into recovery and I was able to rewrite the book from a place of recovery. So here we go, everybody. I'm going to talk to you about the channeled messages that I received from Sophia before each chapter. I'm going to read them, the small channeled message, and then I'll give you some insights from my perspective. Okay, so here we go. Sophia's insight for Chapter 1, Feast and Famine. While I was preparing to write this book, Sophia said to me, you know, Robin, there's only one addiction in your world. Now, very curious, I said, please, Sophia, share your view. She said, the only addiction is to a life of suffering. What tool you use to satisfy your need to suffer is up to you. Food, alcohol, drugs, sex, social media, cigarettes, you name it, are just the poison one might pick to suffer. After considering considering this profound, life-changing information that there is only one addiction, I asked Sophia, why is one addicted to suffering? She replied, the answer is you do not love yourself. Throughout your life, you have learned how not to love yourself. For now, let us say that not loving yourself is the problem, and learning to love yourself is the solution to a life without suffering. Let us begin. So it's interesting when I tell folks about this, that there's only one addiction on the planet, and that's to suffering. It's like this crazy aha moment happens for folks. They're like, wait, suffering? We're addicted to suffering, not to drugs. And yes, we can have a secondary addiction to drugs, but our first addiction is to suffering. But why is everybody so uncomfortable with that is because it's really hard to admit that you're suffering. We're supposed to be happy and joyful, peaceful, and it's hard to admit when you're suffering. And sometimes we save that for saints, right? For example, Jesus or Yeshua's, he died on the cross for us, that he and many other saints are the only ones that were supposed to be suffering. And really, sometimes we look at all the suffering in the world and we say, who am I to call what I'm doing suffering? So those are some of the reasons why we're uncomfortable with the idea of suffering. So if we move on to chapter 2, the name of the chapter was Victim or Addict. Sophia, which came first, the victim or the addict? I asked. Sophia replied, we would answer both. When you experience hurt by another, you begin to distrust your innate love of self. The moment you begin to loathe yourself, a process starts to perpetuate the victim model. You become addicted to self-hate or loathing of self. Being the victim and being the addict is so intertwined that the timing is simultaneous and the emotional impact is the same. And quite often, the victim becomes a victimizer, the one who is hurting himself or herself. In bulimia, you are both the victim and the victimizer. Your victim is caught in the overeating process, and the victimizer is the one causing you to purge. Being the victim and the victimizer is truly for anyone found in any form of addictive behavior. So, to explain the victim and the victimizer just a little bit more. So, as an addict, we see ourselves as the victim. And as an addict, we become our own victimizer by creating harmful and injury to ourselves because of our addictive behavior. So I think what I'm trying to say is when you're in addiction, you typically feel very victimized. And that's why you are suffering. And that's why you turn to a substance or a vice. But the act of hurting ourselves and continuing the process is the act of being our own victimizer or persecuting ourselves. So now we're moving on to chapter 3, Sophia's insights for chapter 3, the journey. Sophia, where does addiction begin? I asked. Sophia replied, your beginning is that moment when you first experience disappointment or heartache from someone who is supposed to love you unconditionally. From that very first moment of humiliation by someone you trust, you step onto your journey of suffering with the potential of surrendering into exquisite grace. While it may not feel like a blessing on the journey, you are indeed blessed to live a life of reaching your full potential of knowing grace. When will grace happen? I asked. She replied, when you are ready to receive it. So in thinking about this chapter, I spent time and still work with as my teachers, Sri Amabhagavan from the Oneness University. And one of the initial things they worked on with us is healing our relationship with our parents. Their feeling was that if we don't heal our relationship with our parents, it impacts all the other relationships that we have in our life. So our parents were not perfect, right? They were doing the best that they could even if it was terrible in some situations, with what they knew. So we never have to condone what they did, but we have to accept without judgment that what they did was the best that they knew how. And I think that's really hard to do. But if you can move into a state of forgiveness of them, you will see great transformation in all of your other relationships on the journey. I'm moving on to Sophia's insights for chapter 4, Understanding Bulimia. Sophia, it seems like all the research on bulimia points to a desire to lose weight. Do you concur? I asked. She replied, it is so easy to place the blame for eating disorders squarely on the shoulders of a society obsessed with being thin. More likely, bulimia is a way to release all the pain you are feeling from being human. Clearly, there are physical, psychological, and cultural issues that impact your view of your body. We desire you move beyond your pain and into a healthy relationship with your vessel. So, as I noted earlier, I am in recovery from obsessive compulsive food disorder and bulimia. But one of the statistics I found very interesting when I was writing the book is that 3.3 million people, mostly women, struggle with bulimia in their lives. And what's interesting is that this is a silent epidemic. So there's probably more people that than they know. And so what I thought interesting about Sophia's insight is that purging bulimia or purging is a way to release all the pain you are feeling from being human. And I think that comes from past lives and current lives, but you can see that you have all this pain inside your body, all of this trauma, and we can see, and for women who have been persecuted for thousands of years and still continue to be persecuted in many places, this purging becomes a way to maybe release the pain that you have been carrying for a while. So instead of the purging, I invite you to work with a professional to determine what is the pain that you're feeling and how can you heal this trauma. So Sophia's insights for chapter 5, The Perfect Daughter. Sophia, there is so much pressure for every little girl or boy to be perfect in the eyes of their parents. Isn't that a lot to ask for? I asked. Sophia replied, first of all, you were born perfect, and you are perfect now in the eyes of the divine. Other questions you might want to ask are, why does society have a different view of what perfection is, and why is it so unattainable? And why does it matter so much? In other words, why does humanity look for perfection on the outside versus on the inside? My last but most important question to humanity is, why are you all so afraid of your divine perfection? So a lot of questions from Sophia there for us and things to really think about. Well, one of the things I discovered in writing this chapter and looking at, what I perceived was a request of my parents to be perfect. What I turned out it wasn't, but that's how I saw it as a child and a teenager and a young woman. And I felt that times they were judging me, but they were never judging me. They were just looking out for my highest and best good. But what I discovered, and this is probably one of the most important things I discovered in Feast and Famine, is that no one else can really judge you unless you convey upon them the power of being a judge. Isn't that powerful? Unless you say, I am going to allow you to judge me because you're the judge, then what they say to you, I know once I stopped giving them that power, I would say, that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I will think about it. And that's all you really have to say. Sometimes I might lose my temper, and use other words. But for the most part, I just want to say thank you for that. And thank you for your perspective. I'll think about it. And that's really, I think, good enough for them or not. Who knows, right? And then your true beauty and strength comes from your relationship with your inner divinity. And so, what do we mean by your inner divinity? It means your heart center, your soul connection, and your connection to the spiritual realm. That when you're feeling that level of connection, then there's a glow that you have. And in fact, people have said to me, why do you have this glow? What kind of moisturizer do you use? And I always reply back, I use Spirit. That's my moisturizer. Because that's what it is. Because when you're connected, there's a sense of peace inside of you. And that radiates the beauty within. And that's the beauty we're looking for, not the beauty that the cosmetic industry or the media tells us is what we should be looking for. All right, we're moving on to Sophia's insights for chapter 6, The Path to Spirit. Sophia, why is it so hard for people to find their way onto the spiritual path? I asked. Sophia replied, quite simply, Robin, they are afraid. When in fear, they cannot see the light that guides them to a joyous life. Fear is so debilitating, and it is promoted by all of the systems on your planet: religion, politics, health, entertainment, and education. If all you are taught is fear, then how can you live from love? The spiritual path is for brave souls who choose to live as love and not allow the fear to consume them. Will spiritual seekers know fear and pain? Of course. They welcome it because you must go through the pain and fear of the past to get to the light and love of the present. From the light-filled present, you can move forward to a magnificent future. So for me, this chapter and Sophia's insights represented that there are good, bad, and ugly experiences that are all leading you to fulfill your soul's destiny. I honestly believe that our soul guides the way. As soon as we incarnated into this physical body, our soul has been trying to reach a desired destiny. And so we have both good, bad, and ugly experiences that are part of the journey. And if we don't get the lesson on the journey, you might have noticed at times there are some experiences that repeat themselves, and you're like, why does this keep happening to me? Because this is one of those soul experiences that you have not gotten the message, and you are not grounding the message inside of you, integrating it in so you can move forward on your soul's journey. So I invite you to embrace them all as training and not punishment. When you accept them and forgive yourself and others, you move forward. You always move forward. When you come into acceptance, you move forward towards the answer that you're seeking, the grace that you required, or the next step on your evolution. The spiritual path is unfolding and you can't rush it. So just sit back and wait for it to unfold. But of course, take action on your path so that the divine knows that you are excited and invested in moving forward. Okay, we're going to take our first break. You're listening to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare, and we'll be right back. Hello, and welcome back to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare. To learn more about my work, please go to clarity.com. That's CLARETY.com. And if there's time at the end of the show, I want to talk to you about my latest project, which is a journal called The Right Recovery. And I'm going to make time for that because I want I want to share that with you. So stay tuned for more information on that. Okay, so we're reviewing Feast and Famine, the channeled messages from Sophia in the book, and we're on chapter 7, choosing to heal and serve. Sophia, what are the qualifications you look for in someone who's on their way to be of divine service? Sophia laughed and she said, first of all, Robin, there is no job interview required. A person becomes of divine service when they are genuinely inspired to share what they have learned on their spiritual journey. Most often, teachers of spiritual information have been deeply wounded themselves and they have committed to healing themselves. When they become genuinely grateful for the grace bestowed upon them by knowing how to heal their pain and suffering, they want to share that with others. Divine service can be a simple smile to a stranger or writing a book on behalf of the divine realm. It all serves. So the right recovery is it's funny, I have that right here. The right recovery, here's my book, is a journal that I'm putting out that um, teaches you the healing power of writing on the recovery process. And for me, writing Feast and Famine, especially the second time I wrote it, when I wrote it in recovery, I could see the difference between the first time I wrote it and the second time. It was like writing it again, but not, because the core of the book was there. But as many of you who are in recovery know, the way you see the world from the eyes of recovery is so different than the way that you see it from active addiction. And this is what I know for sure. When you write your recovery story, you heal yourself. And when you share your recovery story, you heal others. So the very art of writing can be very cathartic. I'm not here to say that it's the only thing you need to do, but it's a very private situation, and you can really share your innermost thoughts on paper. And I guess I would also recommend, since I did this, to have a mental health professional that you're working with, or a group or a life coach to talk through your life story and your suffering so that you can heal. So moving on to chapter 8, mindset and environment. Sophia, is there a cure for addiction? I asked. Sophia gently laughed and said, is that not the reason for this book, Robin? However, I do understand your confusion because the common belief is that there is not a cure for addiction. Therefore, you can never be in remission like with other diseases. The cure for addiction is a genuine change in lifestyle that is achieved by a deep connection to your divine nature, a healthy living environment, a commitment to your wellness, and healing of the negative core beliefs that made addiction seem like a solution to your problems. Because the cure is esoteric and holistic in nature, society is not quite ready to buy into our solution. With the rise in addiction, eyes will be open to the new approaches. That we know for sure. So Albert Einstein said, this is Robin. Albert Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thoughts we use to create them. That's a very profound quote, isn't it? We cannot solve our problems with the same thoughts we use to create them. We have to shift our mindset and our environment to have true change. We must not only shift our mindset, but we must create a new environment that does not encourage our addictive behavior. So for me, as a food addict, I don't keep the foods in the house that would trigger me to be obsessively eating. Some might say, well, isn't that having a life of scarcity? And I'm like, yes, it is. So what? It keeps me healthy. So every once in a while, I might bring it in, but I do not keep my trigger foods in the house. I want to stay in recovery. Okay, moving on to chapter 9, seeking answers. Sophia, I would often look at family and friends in long-term remission from addiction. And I would think, how did they do it? What made them successful at it? How many times did they have to stop and start their recovery before they knew it had to stick? Gosh, I would be so jealous of them because I was never ready to commit to my recovery. And then one day I was. Is that how it works? I asked. Sophia replied, yes, that is exactly how it works. One day you hit rock bottom and you have two choices. One is to return home to be with us in the non-physical world, and the other is to recover and live your mission. You chose your mission, and for that, we are grateful to you, Robin. So, in thinking about Sophia's insights here, what I chose to share is a very interesting thing that I learned, that the best news is that when you choose recovery and heal your trauma, it's not just for you. It is for your family and friends and for society. But even more profound than that, you become the hero of your family lineage by breaking the cycle of addiction in your family. In Indigenous healing, they say that when we break the trauma cycle, when we do the healing, it helps generations in the past and into the future. Something like 5 to 8 generations back and 5 to 8 generations forward. So your recovery, in your truly understanding the healing. So recovery is two parts, right? One is stopping the addictive behavior, but the true recovery happens after that. And that's when you're doing your healing of your trauma. And if you can heal your trauma patterns, you do become the hero of your family, not just in this generation, but generations back and generations forward. Moving on to chapter 10, healing past and present lifetimes. Sophia, what can you share that would enable others to believe that our soul lived many lifetimes and that our soul has a desire to learn specific outcomes in each one? I asked. Yes, Robin, this is an easy topic for some and a very difficult topic for others. The purpose of each incarnation is to grow further your knowing that you are a divine in a human body. There is no one better or worse than you. Each one of you is here experiencing what is required for you to learn on your journey. And yes, the topic of the next chapter is one that triggers great anger and shame on this planet. A global reaction was precisely what was needed for humanity to grow as a species at the time. So what Sophia is talking about is my Holocaust lifetime. So I was in the Holocaust with my family, and I was separated in a barracks with my two children. And what I would do is, because they gave us so little food, I would eat what they gave me, and then I would throw it up and feed it to my children so that they would be alive longer. So I know that may sound gross, and I apologize if you're eating lunch now. But that's what I did to save my children. And so coming into this lifetime, I still came here with this urge to purge. And so I had to heal that, but I had to know about this Holocaust lifetime. And one of the things that was required was for me to forgive my tormentors, which was very hard for me. I had no empathy for them. And then my mentor said to me, well, what if you just looked at it as they were just following orders? Maybe you could forgive them then. And that's how I was able to come into forgiveness of them, so that I could heal that past life, so that I could heal this lifetime of being tormented myself. I was tormenting myself with the bulimia. And so I had to come into healing in this lifetime and heal myself with the help of others and forgive myself. So moving on to chapter 11, Sophia and the Divine Feminine. Finally, it's your turn, I said to Sophia. Ha, It has been my turn way before this page in the book, she replied. I have been with you, Robin, since the very beginning of your addiction, and I have been with you throughout your journey of pain to suffering to surrender to grace. We are grateful that you have taken this journey with us and that you have the courage to bear your soul in the book. After some thought, I concluded that there is no more hiding from me after writing this book. When I shared the idea of no more hiding with a dear spiritual sister, she replied, there is no longer the time, this is no longer the time or place for hiding. The world needs all of us to stand in our truth. And so I thought I would share with you why you may be saying, wait, who's Sophia? How come I don't know who she is? And so Sophia was hidden from us to ensure that the masculine influence was more potent. So in religion, the feminine was really diminished to that of mother or saint or whore even, and that there were very few powerful women in the Bible, and certainly Sophia was given a name that that represents the energy, but we really don't even know who the Holy Spirit is or the Shekhinah in Judaism. And so this is just my opinion, folks. I feel that we diminish the feminine because in our religious texts, because what the leaders of the time knew that is if we could honor both our divine masculine, which religion does, and our divine feminine, which religion does not, if we could honor both of those, we could reach a state of enlightenment individually and as a collective on the planet. And a state of enlightenment, what don't we need if we reach a state of enlightenment would be religious structure. And so it would make sense to them to remove part of the formula for enlightenment of human beings. And I'm going to turn now to number 12, which is Sophia's insights for chapter 12. So we're going to start talking now about Sophia's healing path. What she shared with me was 4 spiritual concepts, and we'll talk a little more about each. So the first spiritual concept she talked about is pain is inevitable. Sophia, what can you share with us about pain that could prevent us from turning pain into suffering? I asked. Sophia replied, you have an interesting phrase on this earth plane, that there are only 2 events that you can count on happening, and they are death and taxes. Clearly, you can count on pain too. I am not saying that to make you feel worse. I am saying that to relax you into the pain because it is inevitable. Do what you can to heal it and do not allow it to consume you. It is in pain's consumption of you that suffering begins. Most important, you cannot recover from a place of focusing on the pain. You must focus on the healing and how you will feel when the pain is gone. This simple manifesting tool can help you to not move into suffering, even if you are in great pain. And I think you've all seen this, right? When you have a friend or a family member that is struggling with a serious illness, and you've seen the ones that are suffering and it seems like they never get better, but then you find the ones who are like, yeah, yes, I have this, but this does not define me. I see myself as well again. I'm going to, honor these treatments, and I'm going to do what is required to be well. And I'm also going to do what I think is required to be well. But the true thing is that I know that I can envision my healing and I can see myself better and I can walk towards that. I can embrace the healing that's taking place. I can embrace the what's presented to me as solutions. And then I can just keep my eye. I keep envisioning that I'm better. And you've seen these people, they get better. right? And you call that a miracle, but the miracle is in their own belief in their own wellness. And so pain is inevitable. And just remember this: we're an integrated system: mind, body, spirit, emotion. If one of them is off, they're all off. So pain in our body is our body's way of showing us or informing us that something is wrong, right? We look at pain and we're like, uh-oh, pain, what am I going to take to get rid of it? But I invite you to listen to the pain, focus your attention on it, stay with it, and see if you can hear what's wrong. See if you can spend time with the pain and say, why are you here? Go into a meditative state with the pain and see if you can talk to it and say, why are you here? What is it that you want me to know? And I promise you, you will hear something. So that's our time for this part of the episode. And we're going to be going into a break. And you're listening to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare, and we'll be right back. Hello, welcome back to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare. And we're talking about feast and famine, healing addiction with grace, some insights from Sophia in the book, the divine feminine, the Holy Spirit, the Shekhinah, and how she likes to be referred to as the grace that is all around us. And so we're on chapter 13 of Feast and Famine. We're talking about suffering is an option. So this is the second step in Sophia's healing path. Sophia, when I share this next answer from you with others, everyone, and I mean everyone, looks like they just received the most important aha truth in their life, I shared. Sophia smiled and said, indeed, this is very powerful and life-altering. There is only one form of addiction on your planet, and that addiction is to suffering. Once you are caught in the trap of suffering, you will have to choose your poison to keep on suffering. This poison can be a substance, a relationship, a belief pattern, or a lifestyle. There is no shortage of tools to stay in suffering on your planet. When you are ready to love yourself, you will choose a healthier path for your life that does not include suffering. So here we are, guys. Number 2, suffering is an option. So suffering is an option. I'm just going to say that again, maybe a third time. Suffering is an option. Because pain and suffering are not one sentence. Like, you might describe someone and say, oh boy, he's in a lot of pain and suffering. That's not necessarily true, because we have known people who are in a lot of pain who are not suffering, right? And then we know people who are suffering, but they're not in a lot of pain. So they don't go together. They're not one phrase. And so one night I was in my falling asleep, I heard my guide say to me, release the disappointment. And I'm thinking, what could that mean? Release the disappointment. And what I found was one of the things that I was suffering over was my disappointment in my life, my disappointment in others, my disappointment in my situation, my disappointment in myself, my disappointment in whatever, in my addiction, my addictive habit, I should say, of overeating and bulimia. So I did this exercise to release the disappointment in others. And I listed all these people and I wrote down how they've disappointed me. And then I forgave them and I released them. And then at the very end, I said, I'm done. And Spirit said to me, good start, Robin, but how about releasing the disappointment in yourself? And that was really harder to do, right? To come into a state of forgiveness of myself so that I could stop suffering. And that took time with an incredible mental health professional and having access to my own inner divinity and working with my own spiritual guides and my own inner genius, my own creative space, and writing this book, rewriting the book. That was what did it for me to be able to move from a place of suffering into true surrender and allowing grace into my life. So, moving on to chapter 14, surrender is required. Sophia, coming to this chapter in my second rewrite of the book, I was riveted by the anger I heard in the voice about surrender in the first draft of the book. I was stuck on whether I should delete this chapter and start again. What I decided is that I would keep my initial chapter and then write more from my current perspective. I could see how much I had shifted on my journey. Sophia replied, "Yes, Robin, life is a constant unraveling of what was, while at the exact time an unfolding of what is to come. This unraveling and unfolding require that you live in the present moment to experience all of the movement with us. As we have shared before, connection to the spiritual realm and the resulting grace can only occur in present moment awareness. Surrender your pain, my dear ones. Grace is here." So, this chapter, this third step in Sophia's healing path is called surrender is required. So, I always tell people surrender is not wishful thinking. I wish this would go away. I wish I'd get better. Surrender is, I am done with all of the power that you can muster from within. I am done. I will never tolerate this again. I am finished. Whatever it is that makes you know that you are truly complete with this suffering. This statement, when you make that statement and it's bold and it's clear, what happens next is you will receive the grace of knowing why you were so upset in the first place and knowing what to do now to get answers. It's almost simultaneous. It's kind of crazy because you've surrendered and grace is just waiting and knocking at the door to help you, to give you solutions on where to turn next, to help you with understanding of what's going on, to help you with an inner knowing of what's right for your life. So surrender is required. And so we're going to move on now to chapter 15. Sophia's insights for chapter 15. Number 4, grace must be allowed. So we had number 1, pain is inevitable. 2, suffering is an option. 3, surrender is required. And 4, grace must be allowed. Sophia, can you give me an example of what the 4 parts of Sophia's divine path to healing can look like in someone's life? She replied, "Imagine sitting on the floor of a dark room, alone and in pain. This scene portrays what suffering feels like. The moment you find the courage to get up and look for the light switch, you are in surrender. When you turn on the light, you are filled with the light of grace. From here, you will find the door that leads you out of the dark room and back into self-love, and ultimately into your divinely inspired life." So we're talking about grace must be allowed. So what do we mean by grace must be allowed? So, and why would we not allow grace into our lives? So I thought of 3 reasons as I was preparing for today's podcast. One is that you may not be willing to do the healing trauma work that's going to be required of you. If you're truly in surrender, you need to do the work and you just might not want to. And why not? Why wouldn't you want to? Because you may be playing a role in your family, in society. You may be that sister or that brother, the one that is messed up, the one that can't get on with their lives. You could be that role and it might suit you because then you don't have to try as hard. Or you might be still suffering and not truly in surrender. So if you are not willing to allow the grace in, I'm not quite sure you're in surrender. So you might want to go back and take a look at why you're still suffering and get the help that you need to move from suffering to surrender. All right, moving to chapter 16, finding wholeness. Sophia, why does someone in recovery from addiction feel compelled to continue to describe themselves as an addict? This question has a multi-level response, shared Sophia. On the most human level, individuals in recovery are terrified of slipping back into using their addictive substance. Therefore, if they call themselves a recovering addict, they can remind themselves of how far they have come and where they do not want to return to. Recovery must take place in many parts of your life, including staying connected to your divine nature, healing your past, living in a supportive environment, having a positive mindset, maintaining health and wellness, having solid plans for your present moment and future lifestyle. Recovery and ultimately remission takes a commitment to not suffering, requires true surrender, and an openness to receiving grace. When you can do these well and live a congruent lifestyle, you are no longer an addict and you have moved from recovery to remission. So that's big. That's big for the addiction community because, for so many years and in so many programs, we're told to keep remembering that we're an addict. But the divine realm is saying that there's a way to move from addiction to recovery to remission. And that is this congruent lifestyle. And when I was writing this chapter, it was interesting because Yeshua came in. Many of you know him as Jesus and said, there's something missing from the book. I thought I was done. And I'm like, okay, what is it? And I was guided to listen to Carolyn Myss' Anatomy of the Spirit. And I learned a lot about this congruent lifestyle. And this is where you are actively keeping your mind, body, spirit, and emotion healthy at the same time. Healthy at the same time. You're thinking about how do I, heal and grow my mind? How do I enhance my spirit? How do I heal my emotions? How do I keep my body healthy? And so in your daily lifestyle, you are managing all four. You are an integrated, congruent system. And when you can do that really, really well, then you can say, you probably have no desire to go back to your addictive nature. You are not suffering anymore. And you can perhaps say that you are in remission. So if you've reached that milestone in your life and you're listening to this, excuse me, it is something to consider. Are you in remission from your addiction? Chapter 17, The Retired Junkie. Sophia, I was inspired to look up the word junkie and found this description in the Urban Dictionary. A junkie is a person who is consumed by an addiction. Aspects of their life suffer as he or she satisfies the addiction. Let me see if I can rewrite this definition Sophia style. I wrote, a junkie is a person who is consumed with suffering. Aspects of their life are consumed by addiction as he or she satisfies their choice to suffer. Sophia exclaimed, exactly. This is a more accurate description from our viewpoint. So we have archetypes. Those are global personality. Carl Jung defined them. Carolyn Myss talks a lot about them. And we have what's called the addict archetype, and it protects us from experiencing past and present traumas again until we are in surrender and ready to allow grace into our lives. So see how much your addict archetype is wreaking havoc in your life. And if you're ready to come into surrender and no longer want to suffer and receive grace, have a talk with your addict archetype and ask it to have a different role in your life. Maybe the tenacity with which it protected you could be the tenacity with which it helps you to heal. And so chapter 18, the long view, I had asked a group of long-term folks what was different for them that they were doing well. And they said that what I learned from asking this group is they agree that they would never change a thing, right? They would never change why they are in, that they were in addiction and here they are today because they followed the path of grace to the life that they have today. And so to summarize this, I'm going to read the last note from Sophia. My dear ones, as you come to the end of this book, I am delighted to know that you have read these powerful words intended to heal you from your journey of suffering. Robin was first a reluctant messenger because she was caught in the throes of her addictive behavior. Over time and with help, she was able to transform herself into the divine messenger that you have experienced in this book. I see the possibilities for your life. Yes, you have made mistakes and made bad choices. From my perspective, it has always been your life unfolding in perfect order. That was then, and this is now. Now you are here and you are listening. I invite you to forgive yourself for your perceived past transgressions. Real transformation for your life can only take place in the present moment. When you live in regret of your past or are fearful of your future, you are wallowing in suffering. You must choose a life of surrender and grace. Are you ready to do so? I am ready to hear your heartfelt surrender and to provide you with the grace you need to heal. What will grace look like for you? That all depends on what you need. Make a list of what you need and share it with me in your prayers. The grace may arrive in a different package than what you had in mind, or do not be tied to any outcomes. Keep doing your work, and I will do my part. It all begins and ends with your unwavering commitment to your wellness and your service to others. May your light shine brightly for all beings whom you meet on your path. In love and light, Sophia. So thank you everyone for listening to Sophia's insights from Feast and Famine, Healing Addiction with Grace. And I promise on my next show in 2 weeks to talk to you about the Right Recovery Journal. It will be out in Amazon next week, a week from today, on the 9th. And so maybe even a little earlier, maybe on the 8th. So look for it in Amazon, the Right Recovery Journal with Robin Clare, and it will take you through lots of fun exercises and lots of insightful exercises for you to use writing as a recovery tool. All right, that's all for today, everybody, and have a good couple of weeks, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning into Hungry for Answers. Learning to love ourselves is the one true solution to addiction. Make a commitment to healing today and see how you can reach your ultimate potential. Remember, you have a divine right to a life filled with love, joy, peace, and abundance. To learn more about me and my offerings, please go to clarity.com. That's Clare, CLARE-ITY.com. See you next time.